Hey, I'm John at Slider Books, and in this video I want to talk about some of the changes that have happened around retail and bookstore sales and things that I would do and focus on if I were trying to open up a bookstore in 2025. Now, retail is a really old business. Retail's been around for a very long time, and it's a boring business, meaning that it is something that should be super predictable. But what's happened in the last few years since COVID is the predictability of a retail store has changed. It's not a very predictable business when you have things like tariffs and other economic forces that are playing on retail. Brick and mortar retail is really difficult. So if I was going to open up a bookstore in 2025, there's three specific areas that I would focus on. And I would probably pick one of these and lean into this specific type of bookstore. The first one would be an entirely new bookstore focusing on the new inventory, what would be high velocity inventory, stuff that is coming out new to print, new in publishing, and just kind of like the popular trends in the publishing industry, and focus on selling just those books. What you're able to do is you can follow the trends and have the books that are most popular, the ones that are being talked about. These high velocity books can be turned over very quickly, and unfortunately, the margins on high velocity inventory like this is very low. It requires a really high footfall and a large amount of traffic through your store to be able to sell this type of high velocity merchandise. You've got a little bit more in the merchandise as far as cost of goods sold because it's new inventory, and the margins, like I said, are a little bit smaller. The retail markup is not as great on new inventory. The second thing that you could possibly do is focus entirely on used books. Now, here what you have is inventory that is a lower velocity. You'll have things that sit on the shelf for much longer when you have used books. The margins, the retail markup on used books is much higher. You can buy used books for much cheaper than what you can typically sell them for. The problem is, because it's a low velocity inventory situation, you're going to need to have your bookstore in a place that the rent is low. You have additional costs tied up with the amount of time that a used book would sit on the shelf otherwise. You have to appeal to a much larger audience, so you have to have a lot more titles that people would be interested in, and that's just the nature of used. You miss out on the opportunity to capitalize on specific trends in the publishing industry. Books that are obviously new and coming out in print and getting a lot of the hype just kind of naturally are not going to be books that you necessarily would have in a used bookstore, so you would miss out on some of that market. Now, the other thing about used is that everybody kind of already has an idea of the books that you don't have in your store, and unfortunately, when you have a bookstore, you want people to have an idea of what you have, but when you walk into a bookstore that only deals in used books, you never really quite know what you're going to find. In some parts, that's part of the fun. That's part of what makes a used bookstore unique. But on the other side, you've got people that know that they can't find a particular book in your store, and so leaning specifically into used only kind of limits what you're able to sell. You can obviously do the mix, but that becomes really difficult. For a lot of years, I did used and new books, and the reason that this was helpful was being able to kind of cushion against any sort of inventory shocks and supply chain issues, because I was able to accumulate a lot of used books when I wasn't able to get them new because of supply chain or just straight costs. It also helps when people sometimes will bring used books for you to buy from them, and you can trade and deal in that way. The third way that you could approach a bookstore in the year 2025 running a brick and mortar retail would be strictly and specifically targeting collectible books, first editions, signed books, and the rare book trade in finding books that are unique to your store. When you're selling new, when you're selling used, essentially anything that's available in your store could be purchased elsewhere. It's not that unique, but if you were to lean specifically into the rare books, you could have books that other stores don't necessarily have, things that are hard to find, and that could be your entire niche. Now again, you're kind of limiting your market, but ultimately what comes down to what bookstore is going to do best is the type of customers that you have in your area and the type of competition you might be dealing with. If there are other used bookstores, other new bookstores, it might be a unique direction to go into just specifically rare, signed first editions and the collectible book market. There's a lot of money in the collectible book market, and some would say that that is the only money left in retail book sales, is specifically focusing on the rare books that have a really high cost. The velocity of this inventory is very low. It takes a really hard time to find a buyer, especially if the book is hundreds or even thousands of dollars. You've got fewer buyers that would be interested in that book. But when you do make that sale, it makes up for the difference because the difference in the velocity, because it's a higher ticket item. So you have to kind of manage where you want to be on that scale between the impulse buying, the low ticket, high velocity books, or the low velocity, high ticket books. So those are 3 things that I've learned over the years running a bookstore of my own. I'm kind of a mix of all 3 of those things, and it seems to work for our area. We're a vacation town, we're a small town, so I have to kind of have my hands in as many different book markets as I possibly can just to make it all work. If you live in a larger area where you can niche and get really specific with the type of bookstore and the type of books that you're selling, then you could do that, and it would be something to consider.